Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to all of you in today's session. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdatin min lisani yafqahu qawli. O Allah, open my heart and ease my task for me and remove the impediments from my speech so that they may understand what I say. Today's session is a very important session. It's a very timely topic, and as usual, ACC has taken the lead to apprise its members and bring all the other professionals up to speed on this important topic. As you must all be aware that recently an Asset Declaration Ordinance has been promulgated, commonly referred to as the Tax Amnesty, and that is our today's session's topic. So we'll begin by briefly introducing myself. For those of you who are attending the session for the first time, I'm a fellow Chartered Certified Accountant, honored to be chairing the M&P and the Taxation Committee of ACCA. In addition to that, I'm also a CFA charter holder, Chartered Public Finance Accountant, Chartered Accountant with AML specialization. Over 10 years fund of experience gained by both working abroad as well as in Pakistan. At the moment, working as a managing partner at MLCC, which is the pioneer ACC and legal practicing firm in Pakistan. Besides that, with regard to training sessions, I'm honored to have conducted mandatory promotional trainings of government officers at MBTD, having worked with top institutions like National Bank, Bank Al-Habib, Mizan, HBL, IBP, Lahore, Karachi, Pakistan Tax Bars, Chambers, ICAP, ICMAP, our very own ACCA. In fact, Harun Sahib is sitting right here with me. I remember the days when we really started this CPD webinar program, and those early days we used to have extensive sessions. So that's also like being a torchbearer for that with regard to the trainer side, and that's something I am really honored for. For those of you who do like to read, I'm a regular contributor in various English language dailies and international research publications. I'm also representing Pakistan on the Global Tax Forum. I'm a life member and chairman of Finance Economic Affairs Committee of Lahore Tax Bar, 4 times serving chairman liaison committee of the Lahore Tax Bar. I'm also chairing the Tax Clinic, which is a joint initiative of Lahore Chamber and ACCA, and have served on the Finance Economy and Taxation Committee of Lahore Chamber. In addition to that, I'm also advisor to several parliamentarians on various forums on economic and taxation reforms. Also been honored to have received various awards, particularly Exceptional Public Value Award 2 year running and the National Advocacy Award by ACCA. So that's pretty much about me. You would be having the handouts, so you can go through the intro in detail later on. So let's move on to the major session for today. Before that, just a professional acknowledgement that several legislations and reports of FBR, World Bank, various organizations, and our own firm MLCC have been used in developing this presentation for your use. And due to limited time and the extensive nature of the topic, we have strived to cover the maximum possible core concepts within the allotted time. However, as you can understand, the content coverage had to be prioritized and managed in order to suit the requirement and constraints of today's session. So let's start. Before we talk about the tax amnesty, or commonly known as the Asset Declaration Ordinance of 2019, let's have a quick review of the history of tax amnesties in Pakistan. Well, the first ever and one of the more successful tax amnesty schemes in Pakistan was launched during Field Marshal Ayub Khan's era in 1958. It resulted in a collection of approximately 1.12 billion Pak rupees, which at the exchange rate of the time amounted to approximately 0.24 billion US dollars. It resulted in 71,289 people coming forward and filing their declaration, and thereby extending the tax net by the same amount. After that, General Vijaya Khan also launched a tax amnesty scheme in 1969, which was not as successful. It ended up adding only 19,600 new taxpayers within the tax net and a declared assets of just 920 million Pak rupees. After that, we had a tax amnesty by the then head of the state, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, well, technically he was prime minister, so not really the head of state. He launched a tax amnesty in 1976, which saw the number of people declaring assets actually declining drastically as compared to the previous two tax amnesties. And assets worth only rupee 270 million were declared. So just put that in perspective: 1.12 billion, 920 million, and 270 million. Then there was a scheme launched by General Zia-ul-Haq's government, which was a total disaster in terms of both the revenue collection and the number of new taxpayers. Perhaps one of the reasons that there wasn't that much motivation regarding a tax amnesty at that point of time, Pakistan being a recipient of generous funds flowing into the country for various reasons. Then we had the PMLN government tax amnesty scheme in 1997. It added only rupee 141 million. In 2000, General Musharraf launched an amnesty, which was the most successful amnesty of the country to date. However, there was a technical lacuna. This amnesty allowed politically influential people, or what we commonly refer to as PEP, politically exposed persons, to take benefit of the amnesty. So the result of the amnesty was that there were asset declaration of approximately $3 billion. And it was the most successful one in terms of the revenue collection. Prior to this, there were 3 tax amnesties launched by the prior governments, and they were not really that successful, with only 128 people coming into the tax net. However, there were 2 tax amnesties which were launched in 2016 and 18. The one in 2016 saw 10,000 declarations and a meager 0.85 billion rupees, less than 1 billion, being declared. However, the 2018 tax amnesty was a success in terms of revenue collection. It generated close to $1 billion in revenues. However, it didn't result in any significant change in the tax compliance culture. So this shows this brief intro of the tax amnesty history in Pakistan. We can see that this disease of tax evasion and the curse of black money apparently has been engulfing Pakistan since its early years. It's not a recent phenomenon or a product of last 2-3 decades, as is commonly believed. So recently there has been a lot of hue and cry over the Asset Declaration Ordinance 2019, which has been introduced by the incumbent government. And this ordinance introduced by the government is commonly referred to as the tax amnesty scheme. The opposition has termed this as an opportunity for the near and dear ones and the politically exposed personalities to whiten their black monies. It is factually incorrect, because just like the tax amnesty in 2018, the political personalities and their relatives are not allowed to take advantage of this scheme. We'll be going through these details in a bit. Also, there have been claims that this amnesty scheme is an exact copy of the one launched in 2018. And as a result of these claims and some other things, there are a lot of confusions as to what exactly is this scheme. Is it any different from the last one? Whether it can help in the stated objective of achieving the broadening of the tax base, and what exactly entails in this new scheme. Let us briefly examine all these questions in an objective manner. So we'll begin by the overview of the Assets Declaration Ordinance 2019, the amnesty. This ordinance has been promulgated allowing undisclosed, unreported, and or even underreported assets, sales or expenditures up to 30th of June 2018, and or any Benami assets acquired or held on or before the date of declaration to be legally declared for the payment of very low taxes. So let's take a pause here. There are 2 parts to this. Number 1, anyone availing this tax amnesty can declared their previously undisclosed, unreported, and or underreported assets, sales and or expenditures, that is up to 30th June 2018. That's the first bit. The second bit is the Benami assets. If somebody had any Benami assets, then they can declare that as of the date of declaration. So Benami assets have the timeline that any assets held on or before the date of declaration can be declared. For other categories, the deadline is to declare those assets, sales, expenses that were up to 30th of June 2018. So what does mean that, let's say somebody is filing their declaration on 30th of June 2019. So they can declare their underreported assets or and undisclosed assets and or unreported assets, sales, expenditures for period up to 30th June 2018, not any period after that. However, for Benami asset, it can be disclosed for as of 30th June 2019. So this is an important but subtle difference that you need to understand. And this is also vital because Pakistan has enacted the Benami legislation, which now has promulgated serious punishments for those indulging in those transactions. So this being the first amnesty or asset declaration ordinance after the legislation addressing the issue of Benami asset, really put this particular nature of transaction under the radar. And that's why, as we'll be discussing, this is something which is very important and a core component of this asset declaration ordinance. So the scope, we briefly discussed the introduction, what exactly is being covered by this amnesty. But let's talk a bit about the scope of this amnesty. Right now on your screens, you can see the exact extract of the ordinance. This is section 3. It reads, subject to the provisions of this ordinance, any person may make on or before 30th June 2019 a declaration in respect of any undisclosed assets held in Pakistan and abroad, but acquired up to, as we have just discussed, 30th June 2018. Similarly, any undisclosed sales, but up to 30th June 2018, undisclosed expenditure incurred up to 30th June 2018. However, Benami assets acquired or held on or before the date of declaration, which at the most can be, under the current legislation, 30th June 2019, bearing any extension in the date. So now that we have covered the scope, let's discuss few important conditions for the declaration. This declaration has some vital differences as compared to the declarations that have been the subject of previous amnesties. One core requirement is that effectively what we technically call cash amnesty has kind of been reduced to the current period. How? Let's find out. Any cash that is held in Pakistan, which one is to declare under this amnesty, is to be deposited into the declarant's bank account and then kept in the account until at least 30th June 2019. So if you were to declare, let's say you want to make your declaration next week, then not only should you have that cash in your bank account, but you will need to hold that cash in that bank account till 30th June 2019. Why? What is being achieved here, or what is the attempt to achieve here? There are two things that are being envisioned here. Number one, what used to happen in the prior amnesties was that since almost always the rates of amnesties are very low, what we can refer to as dirt cheap, many of the people availing the amnesties used a tactic where they would declare more cash in hand than they actually had. So that resulted in them having a lot of cash on paper but not in hand. And what was done then was that later on the odd and malpractices used to carry on, and the future earnings from next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years were underreported, and the excess cash was reconciled because of this previously declared excess cash in the amnesty. Let me try to make this clearer with an example. So for example, let's say somebody used to declare 10 million in cash in hand. Let's keep it simple. But they actually had 1 million in cash in hand. So why did they declare 9 million more than they actually had? Well, the reason was that now they had 9 million more white-end legal money, cash in hand, for which they did not have to provide any evidence. Now they can use this excess of 9 million as cash in hand to justify the future earnings. So next year, maybe they had a 2 million earning, and they know that 400,000 is tax exempt. So maybe they declared just 400,000. So, but their actual earning was 2 million. So what to do with the 1.6 million? They would not declare that, but they would be able to reconcile that in the wealth statement, because remember that excess 9 million that was declared in the amnesty, that can now be used to justify this 1.6 million excess in the income which is underreported. So by having this requirement, and by requiring the people to actually deposit the cash in the bank account, to have the cash in the bank account, the government and the FBR have tried to close this loophole, which used to be, I would say, misused. Secondly, why is it required to keep the cash in the account till 30th June 2019? There are two aspects to this. Number one, the liquidity requirement. There is an economic crunch going on in the country at the moment. Banks having more cash is a good thing. Second, and more relevant and more important from the regulatory perspective, is that people can borrow from someone and put the cash in their bank account for some time period. Doing that for a longer time period would comparatively be difficult. Should raise a logical question. What then? What about the people who would be filing it near the last dates? Well, that is a very valid question, and they would have this undue advantage that they would still be able to borrow from someone, put it in the bank for a day or two, avail the amnesty, and then take that out. So, as is normally the case, the law is not foolproof. There are still lacunas that could have been addressed. Secondly, just in line with the requirement to have the cash in the bank account in Pakistan, if somebody has any foreign liquid assets which are declared but not repatriated back to Pakistan under the scheme, in addition to being taxed at a higher rate, which we would see in a bit, there is also the requirement that this foreign liquid asset must be deposited in the declarant's foreign bank accounts before 30th June. So the same evidence is being required, even if somebody declares I have foreign liquid assets and I'm not repatriating them to Pakistan, and it's okay, I'll pay a bit of higher tax rate. That's fine by me. Well, why do you want to do that? Well, there could be genuine economic reason. You might be actually concerned for one of the various reasons. Maybe the prospect in your relevant sector are not so good. Maybe you require liquidity in the country you are residing, or whatever the reason. Fair enough. Or could it be that you want to manipulate the system? That wouldn't be so good. Okay, that wouldn't be so good. So the evidence is required to ensure that one is not manipulating the system and they actually hold the cash in the foreign liquid assets. Just like I explained for the local system, if somebody do not have the foreign liquid cash they are declaring and no evidence is required, they can still use that to manipulate and underreport future earnings. So what they have tried to do is actually attempted to close that loophole. Similarly, we also have this requirement that any foreign liquid assets repatriated to Pakistan under this scheme are required to be deposited into the declarant's own bank account locally or invested in Pakistan Banao certificates or any foreign currency denominated bonds issued by the federal government. So if the foreign liquid assets are not repatriated, provide evidence they are in the foreign bank account, pay higher tax rates. Foreign liquid assets repatriated to Pakistan, deposit them either in the local bank account of yourself or invest them in the Pakistan Banao certificate or one of the foreign currency denominated bonds issued by the federal government. Or if the cash is held in Pakistan, show that it is in your bank account and retain it till 30th June 2019. So these are some of the important exclusions, important conditions for the declaration. Now let's talk about some exclusions which are not covered within this amnesty framework. But before I move on to the exclusions, I think it's time to take some of your questions. Do we have any?
Yes, there is a question which is about the difference between undisclosed and Benami assets.
Okay, that's a very good question. Benami asset has now been defined under the Benami legislation, although that's not the topic of today's session, but since you have asked and it's somewhat relevant, I'll answer to clarify. An undeclared is an asset that you probably and most likely hold in your own name, but you have not declared that. So maybe you had a property which you haven't shown. Maybe you brought a piece of land. Maybe you had a car. Maybe you made some investment in some shares, etc., etc. But you have not disclosed that to the government, to the regulatory authorities. A Benami asset, on the other hand, is an asset which is not held in your name. So the question of the disclosure is out of the question because you have not shown that in your name. So obviously you won't be disclosing, but the point is you have not shown that in your name. However, under the Benami Act, if I recall correctly, the assets that fulfill certain conditions, like they are in the name of your first blood relations and declared by them, they are now not referred to as Benami. Benami would be held by, for example, in the name of your employee, in the name of your cook, in the name of a distant cousin, and you have not declared them. They are referred to as Benami asset. So if we want to make it simple, as a crux, we can say an undisclosed asset is something that you have held legitimately in your name, but you have not properly disclosed it. So you are violating the law by keeping it hidden. A Benami asset, on the other hand, is which you have criminally tried to hide by holding it in the name of another person when actually you are the legitimate owner of that asset. I hope that makes it clear. Next.
I have this question. Do you think it would be appropriate if a restriction would have imposed to keep the amount for at least 45 days in bank account, irrespective of the date 30th June?
I think that would have been more just. That would give a level playing field to everyone. It's actually a fantastic idea, and I was just thinking about similar introduction that it should have been made, because as we have discussed, the people who would be availing amnesty near the end dates would actually be benefiting more in terms of the cash flow management, if nothing else. So yeah, I'm on board with you on that. Next, please.
What are the chances of this amnesty scheme succeeding where previous ones have failed? What might be the scheme features that might contribute to its success or failure?
The million-dollar question. Well, we actually have an entire session, the last session of this presentation, dedicated to this question. So let's hold our horses here, and I promise we'll be answering that in extensive detail. Next.
Does a Benami asset mean any asset acquired from the proceeds of any criminal activity?
Okay, I've just given you the answer to the Benami asset, but to answer your question, it can or it cannot be. It might be that the proceeds were absolutely legitimate, but you are not declaring it, and now by not declaring it, you have committed an illegal act. So effectively, they now become proceeds from an illegal act, because you might be trying to evade the taxes, which is not legal. Normally, we associate Benami with like some criminal activity. It's not necessary. It can be the proceeds of criminal activity, or it can be the proceeds of non-criminal activity, but held in the Benami name to dodge the tax authorities. And thereby doing that, it becomes a criminal activity in itself. Next. Okay, great. So let's continue. Meanwhile, you can just write the questions in the dialog box if you have any. So before the questions, we were talking about the exclusions. So right now we have talked about a little brief history of the tax amnesties in Pakistan. And if you notice, you might have noticed that generally, other than General Zia's amnesty, the amnesties during the period of military rule have been very successful. And the amnesty during the civilian rule have not been so successful. What do you think is the reason? Any feedback? And purely from a professional perspective. That's what I'm looking for in the answers.
Gulrez Raza is saying, did not get the term in question. Is it Benami assets or as in no-name assets?
Benami asset. You have translated that in English, but both in the ordinance and the Benami act it's referred to as Benami.
Fiza is facing issues with audio.
Okay, I'll give you guys 30 seconds to give your responses, and then I'll move on.
Repeat the question.
Okay, the question is, when we went through the brief history of tax amnesties in Pakistan, starting from Ayub Khan's era in 1958, right up to 2019, we noticed that the amnesties during military rule have been comparatively more successful. The most successful being in General Musharraf's tenure. The amnesties during civilian rule have not been that successful. What is the professional reason, in your opinion, for that?
Irfan Ali's opinion, not very professional though, but saying people are afraid of army. They can enforce the rule of law.
Okay.
But if I was to give an answer, if I'm allowed to, I think just because there were politicians who were allowed to participate in the asset declaration or the amnesty scheme during, and those were the bigger culprits who had Benami assets in their names, and therefore they used it as an opportunity, wasn't it?
Well, we can say that about General Musharraf's, fair enough, fair point. How about the success of Ayub Khan's? He didn't allow that. Are we good with the internet? Good to go? Great. Okay, did we receive any other response yet?
There are other responses.
So I'll take 2-3 more.
Okay. There's another one, sort of more carefully written.
Okay.
People respect and trust army.
Okay.
It's another response. Hamad Ahmed is saying accountability. Nuruddin Dimani is saying because they allow politicians to participate. Similar answer.
He copied your answer.
Faiz Ali Khan saying people trust military governments more than they trust public governments. Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
That's it.
Let me address that for you. Actually, before I give you the answer, let me just help you recall the last amnesty, and you'll all get the answer yourself. If you remember the last amnesty in 2018, there was a lot of uncertainty. People were saying it would be challenged in the court and all, and the results were really, really low. Hardly anybody was availing the amnesty. Then, a few days, I think it was less than 2 weeks, if I remember correctly, before the amnesty ends, the Supreme Court declared that it's none of the business of the Supreme Court. It's the business of the state to do that. And Supreme Court would not be entertaining any petitions in this regard. And once that, 2018, and once that was announced, within less than 2 weeks, boom.
Yeah, because once Supreme Court had taken up the case, there was a level of uncertainty in the marketplace whether
That's the keyword I was looking for. So there are 2 reasons. Market businesses hate uncertainty, and second is enforcement. What happens is generally there is uncertainty around any amnesty scheme. With dictatorial rule, because most of the institutions and state organs are unified in that uncertainty is removed. That if there is this thing, then all the state organs are on the same page and it would be enforced. And the classic example of that is the 2018 amnesty. As soon as the amnesties, as soon as the uncertainty relating to the amnesty was removed, it became a success. So let's move forward after we had that interesting discussion. And no, it's not because people love one institution more or the second. That may be a patriotic thing and very good, but not the topic of today's session. Remember, nobody loves to pay taxes in the world. If you say to people, come and pay voluntarily, nobody, not even in the developed countries. It always have to be a balanced approach, the cost-benefit approach or stick-and-carrot approach, done in a very professional manner, properly implemented, sans any confusion or suspicions. So let's move forward.
I think from a professional perspective, ACC has maintained the right tone. I mean, coming up with a research report that has a title, Tax as a Force for Good. I mean, unless professionals develop that, frame of mind, the tax is not something bad. Tax is something that is good for the countries and the nations. I think that will probably help us.
I totally agree, and ACC is playing a very important role in that. I mean, personally, I'm proud to share that MLCC, being the pioneer ACC and legal practicing firm, we advise all our clients to do the right thing, and that now, particularly now that all the systems are being integrated, databases being built, OECD being enforced, it's even from the business perspective in their own interest to have everything properly accounted for and pay their due taxes. The problem with Pakistan is a problem of perception. Perception is stronger than reality. We often have this discussion on the tax committee avenue as well, that one of the prime reason people cite is that they have to take care of everything themselves, so why should they pay the taxes? The state say, if you don't pay us the taxes, how can we improve the system? So it's like that dilemma of who came first, the egg or the chicken, right? And so people are saying first the government start delivering, then we'll start paying taxes. The state is saying we are improving the system, start paying the taxes, and we'll continuously improve the system, which in my opinion is the logical way to go forward. So let's move forward with that. Next up are the exclusions. So importantly, the ordinance, or as it is commonly referred to as the amnesty, is not applicable to the following. Number one, the holders of public office and their dependents, as well as any of their benami guards. So it's a pretty nice clause which covers up that particular area of misuse or abuse by politically exposed persons. So anybody who is holding a public office, not just a politician, so even the bureaucrats, even the generals, anybody who is holding a public office cannot avail their amnesty. So hey, what's the problem? I'll just get it done in my wife's name. No, you can't. Even your dependents can't do that. Okay, no problem. Chaudhry Allah Deta, my driver, he'll do that. No, you can't even do that in the name of your benami guard. So far, so good. One of the lacunas that is left, and we are waiting for FBR's rules to be finalized and released for that, is how would it be assessed that who is a public office holder or their dependent or their benami guard. And this is the same critic that was raised on 2018's Amnesty as well. It also said that the holders of public office and their dependents can't avail that, but it didn't introduce any mechanism to find out who is the holder of the public office or their dependent. For example, Mrs. Razia Shahnawaz avails the amnesty. What mechanism would there be to ensure that she is not the dependent of a public office holder? So since the FBR rules are in the feedback stage at the moment, this is something for which we have to wait and see how it is being addressed or not in the rules. But with regard to the ordinance, as far as the law is concerned, they have introduced this clause to try to stop that abuse. A public company, as defined under clause 47 of section 2 of the income tax ordinance, cannot avail them. Fair enough, public funds are involved, so they shouldn't be allowed that. But what this means is that the private companies would be able to avail this, right? Because the exclusion only excludes the public company, not the private one. So that's how you have to read between the line and interpret the law. Matters where proceedings are pending in the court of law, certainly if the matter is pending in the court of law, you can't avail the amnesty. Perhaps if you want to, with agreement of the concerning officers and the FBR, withdraw your case and then avail the amnesty, which can be a pretty good idea. I mean, if you are not very confident and the amnesty is offering you a 2% rate, otherwise you might end up paying 28, 30%. Well, it's a golden opportunity. But if you are not certain, that means the counterparty, the taxman, is more certain. In which case, why would they agree for you to withdraw the case from the court of law? They would rather have the court decide that. Anyway, matters where the proceedings have attained finality under the respective tax laws, again, in that scenario, you cannot avail the tax amnesty. Furthermore, matters where the proceeds or assets involved are derived from a criminal offense. So what does this mean? That a smuggler can't come and say, well, actually, these are the proceeds of the smuggling operations I've been running for a decade or so, and now I want to declare that under the amnesty. Thank you, but no thanks. They can't. Gold and precious stones. Now, this is very important. I want you to pay attention here. And this is slightly different from the previous amnesties. Gold and precious stones cannot be declared under this amnesty. And I want you to start thinking why. I'll be asking you. Bearer price bonds cannot be declared under this amnesty. Bearer assets. What are bearer assets? Which are not in any one person's name. For example, open share or investment instruments. They cannot be declared under this amnesty scheme. Now, my question to you is, why these last three categories? If you are allowing movable assets, immovable assets, even sales, expenditures, why restrict these? Does it make any sense? What is the purpose? Anyone? I'll give you like 40 seconds for your feedbacks.
Nuruddin Vimani is saying they can be used for future. They are same as cash.
Okay, more. What was this last gentleman's full name again?
Nuruddin Vimani. There's another one. Repeat the question. Haris Ahmed is saying to stop the black money circulation. Gulrez Raza is saying perhaps because there will be no audit trail of such assets to prove to authorities that they are legitimate. Ahmad Ahmed is saying market value changes. Falak Iqbal Naqvi is saying because of their implication in money laundering.
Very good. We got three right answers. Well, it's not because of market values. They can be determined, and you do know the values of the price bonds or bearer assets or what's the gold rate, etc. It's because it can be used in money laundering because it's bearer, not in a specific person's name. And we all know Pakistan struggles with FATF's grey list. So it was also one of the requirement to introduce stringent controls around gold, precious stones, bearer assets, including price bonds. So this is addressing that. Also, it can be used to abuse the system, just like in the case of cash previously. So the first guy, and there were two other gentlemen, they were absolutely right. Well done to you guys. It is introduced to curb the menace of money laundering or whitening the proceeds of criminal activities through these bearer assets or gold and precious stones. Gee, you wanted to say something, Arun?
Yeah, they were other interesting answers, so I just thought I'd relate them as well. So, Amna Sani has given a good answer, Faisal Manzoor has given an answer.
Okay, now that they have taken the trouble to reply, I think you should quickly go through that.
Amna is saying because the black money has to be physically injected into the economy through the amnesty, price bond stones, etc., cannot be linked to a person. Nuruddin Demani said the aim of, another comment from him, the aim of amnesty is to bring money in the economy, but this is against amnesty. Faisal Manzoor is saying these assets are like Benamidar. What is Benamidar? I mean, somebody's asking that.
Benamidar is the person who is holding the Benami assets,
Okay.
who has the Benami assets.
It's easy to hide ownership.
Okay, great. So now that we are clear on this, I think you guys have a few questions. So let's quickly take a few questions before we go into the next section. In this section, we have covered the exclusions. So all these people and assets cannot be declared under the tax amnesty scheme introduced by way of the Asset Declaration Ordinance 2019. G.
If someone is filing for the first time, his source of income is always agriculture, from where he made all his assets. And now he wants to file his tax return. Should he go through amnesty or should he simply file his tax return?
This is Tawfiq.
Okay, Tawfiq, you are taking free of cost tax advisory service. Okay, thank ACCA for that. Well, the thing is this, that you should, even if you were not having taxable income, but held assets in your name. For example, if you have agricultural income, this means you will definitely have agricultural land in your name, most likely, if not anything else. Even by virtue of that, you were required to be registered for NTN and filing your return. Now, there are two aspects to the regulatory requirement here. One is paying your due taxes here. Now, since agricultural income is largely a subject of provincial taxes, and as such, there are no material income taxes on that, you can get away with that side. However, you still needed to file your income tax return. And by not filing that, you have made a violation. So to answer your question, which side should you go? Amnesty might be a good idea. Just wait for a few days to see what the rules define. Whether that violation with regard to not filing your return would also be condoned if you file the amnesty. Because at the moment, if you just file by way of an amnesty, one thing is clear, if you did not pay any of the due taxes, that would be legitimized, that would be condoned, it's done away with it, you are fine with it. But you have not filed your tax returns. What would be done with regard to that? For that, we have to wait for the finalized rules to be released by FBR. And just before the session we were discussing, hopefully we'll hold a brief session on that too, once FBR releases those rules. So next.
Waqas Ahmed asked, do you think the level of uncertainty for the current amnesty scheme isn't that much as it was used to be in the past? Is this the only factor to guarantee the success?
Well, on the contrary, I think there is more uncertainty at the moment. When we are doing these sessions from ACC's platform, we have to follow a very particular code, and we have to stay really within the professional ambit, and there are many things which we should not be speaking on these forums. But look around yourself, turn on your television, read the news and all that, and you'll see that generally there is more of an atmosphere of uncertainty at the moment. So in my opinion, there is more uncertainty at the moment. How can that be reduced? How can this amnesty be made a success? As I shared previously, we'll be discussing that in more details in the last session of today's topic.
Mahmood Said says, is Appellate Tribunal Inland Revenue a court of law for the purpose of this ordinance?
Well, court of law is normally referred to as high courts, but with regard to tax proceedings and in the context of this amnesty scheme, yes.
Someone who is not a tax filer and wants to avail amnesty.
You have to say the name to who's asking the
Can he
question.
avail that? Sanjay Kumar.
Say that again, the question.
Someone who is not a filer and wants to avail amnesty scheme, can he avail that?
Well, we did hear the Minister of State for Revenue saying only the filers would be able to avail that. There's nothing restrictive in that sense in the ordinance itself. However, as I've shared with you, the rules are being formulated at the moment. Remember how it works. The ordinance is the legal body. It has given the law. To address the practical question and how it would actually work in practice, the rules are formed. Just like we had in income tax ordinance and the income tax rules, we had the sales tax act and the sales tax rules. So we have this asset declaration ordinance, and now its rules are being formulated. It is very much possible that since the minister has said that there might be some restriction to that effect put in the rules. So we'll have to wait for the release of the rules. Next.
Gurreza asks, can I please ask the trader what about an individual who wants to declare his gold assets which he purchased with legitimate funds with proof and invoices?
If you have the proof of invoices, their funds were legitimate, then simply file your tax return.
Okay, and Umarzia asks, is it applicable on movable assets like vehicles?
Very good question. Just hold your horses. It's coming up in the next session. That's all? Great, thank you. So let's move forward. Now that we have discussed about the exclusions as well, let's move forward and discuss about the tax rates and values, and where the question that was asked in the last would also be addressed. So these are the tax rates and values. If you see on your screen, you have three columns. The first one is outlining the class of assets, income or expense. The second one is highlighting what would be the value that would have to be declared. And the third one is showing the applicable rates. So the class of assets, we have domestic immovable properties like land, domestic immovable properties which are constructed, buildings, houses, and plazas, foreign liquid assets not repatriated, foreign liquid assets repatriated, unexplained expenditure, undisclosed sales, and all assets except domestic immovable properties. So the answer to your question, whether the movable assets can be declared, is the answer, yes. So, अगर गाड़ी शाड़ी आपने declare नहीं की, now is the time to do that. Especially अगर उसके आपके पास paper trail नहीं है. So let's go through this because this is important. For domestic immovable properties, such as land, the applicable tax rate would be 1.5%. However, it would need to be on the higher of 150% of the value prescribed by FBR under section 68 of the income tax ordinance, or 150% of DC value. So what is all this jargon here? Let me help you with that. What's happening at the moment is there is a very complex and unique system in operation in Pakistan with regard to taxes on properties. The properties are registered on using DC values. DC values are very low, as low as even 1/5 of the actual market value. Then there is advanced income tax, which is collected on the FBR values. That is a fairly recent phenomena introduced in the last few years. These are the values for major urban centers announced by FBR, which are higher than DC values, but still comparatively very low than market values. They are even 50% lower than market values at times. So the problem is that, for example, you buy a property for 2 crores. Okay, I'll just say in the international denominations. You buy a property for 20 million rupees. The DC market value might be just 5 million. And the FBR value in fact might actually be 1 million. So what's happening is the actual market value is 20 million. The proceeds involved is 20 million, but the FBR value on which you are paying the advance income tax is 1 million. And the value on which you are more likely to register your property, the DC value, unless obviously you want to register at higher value, pay higher taxes, you are such a good person, then amazing. Otherwise, just following the law, if you are just registering it at the DC value, you are registering it at 5 million. So can you see the problem? With regard to DC value, there would be a difference of 15 million. With regard to the FBR value for income tax purposes, there would be a difference of 1 million. However, this is legitimate because the law has prescribed this system, this mechanism, so this has been followed. However, with regard to the amnesty, they have said, well, not so quickly, not so smart. We are giving you very low rates already, but still you need to pay your fair share. So you would need to pay 150% of the FBR value or 150% of the DC value, whichever is higher, which should be fairly close to the market value. So this 1.5% of this value would most likely be 2.25% of the value on which you would have registered the asset. So your effective tax rate would become 2.25%, which is still fairly low, especially if you have not declared your property. Instead of paying 3%, being a non-filer, you end up paying 1.5% of this value or 2.25% of the declared value. You still end up saving 1.5 to 0.75%. Now think about that in terms of the total amount, 20 million, 30 million. That's a big saving if you ask me. Next up, domestic immovable properties for the constructed structures. The same concept is applicable for the same reason as I just discussed in details. Assets value would be taken to be at least 100% of DC value, where FBR value has not been notified for the constructed property. Then we have foreign liquid assets not repatriated. You'll have to take the higher of the fair market value or cost determined using exchange rate on which date? At the date of the declaration date. So whenever you are making the declaration, at that date you'll take the exchange rate to see what is the fair market value and what was the historical cost of foreign liquid assets which are not repatriated. And then that would be taxed at the highest tax slab within this amnesty, which is 6%. Now my question to you all, and you'll have like a minute to respond at the most, is why would you have the fair market value for the foreign liquid assets? Aren't they just like cash? So why do you need the foreign liquid assets fair market value? Anyone?
The fluctuating forex rates could raise further.
Okay. Can you hear me, Gulriz? Yes. So Rashid, it's probably something wrong with your system. Okay, Gulriz, if it's just due to fluctuating forex rates, then why even say anything about the market value? Just simply this, you can say that, convert that at the prevailing exchange rate on the declaration date, right? No need to mention the assets fair market value, my friend. Gee, we are getting more responses. Zahoor Ahmed is saying foreign liquid assets will be assessed at fair market value to reflect current exchange rate. Well, guys, just pay attention. If you see after fair market value, they have still mentioned that you have to convert that using the exchange rate on the date of declaration. So it's not just a question of exchange rate, that is already being addressed. The answer, okay, I promised a minute is over or not? I think it's over, so I'll just proceed. Did we receive any additional comment?
Small amount liquid assets include bonds as well, which are close to maturity.
Well done, Usman, because liquid asset is not just cash, it's any asset that is highly convertible to cash. So it can be a bearer certificate, it can be a bond. So for those assets, definitely you need the market value. That is the reason that market value is required, and the higher of the cost or the market value would be taken, and that value would then be converted using the exchange rate prevalent on the date of declaration. I hope you got the point now. Then we have the foreign liquid assets which are repatriated. For those assets, their actual value would be taken and the applicable tax rate would be 4%. Why would we not use the conversion rate for these assets? Anyone? 30 seconds. It's fairly straightforward. Come on, guys. It's not even technical, it's common sense. Gee, anyone? It takes a few seconds for them to write.
Yeah.
Okay, the time's up. So if your comments come after this, well done to you. Well, because those assets would be repatriated in Pakistan and would now be in Pak rupee, right?
Yeah, Usman made a comment that because they will deposit in foreign bank accounts, foreign currency bank accounts.
We are talking about the foreign liquid assets that would be repatriated in Pakistan. They have to be deposited in the local bank accounts, or they can be invested in Pakistan Banao certificates, or they can be invested in any foreign currency bonds issued by the government. So you'll simply take the value that would be in dollar, and by the way, we'll be covering that in a bit. The tax on these amounts has to be paid in the foreign currencies. The rules are currently being formed to allow currencies other than dollars. The point has come up now, so I'll just address it right now, otherwise it was to be addressed later on. One of the bigger problems in the last amnesty was that the tax on the foreign assets had to be paid in dollar. The problem with that is all those transactions have then to be routed through New York, which takes a lot of time. The most efficient transaction takes a minimum of around 7 days, which practically is very inefficient and resulted in the last amnesty scheme in a lot of people not able to avail the amnesty. This time, two things have been done. Number one, they have allowed you to file the declaration by 30th June 2019 and then deposit even on later date by paying some additional surcharge. Secondly, as per my information, but this can be changed, the rules currently being formulated are looking at the options of allowing other currencies, including UAE's, what do you call that? The UAE currency, UAE's dirham, as well as the Saudi riyal. They would also be included within the ambit of this. So a person can also pay their due tax under this amnesty using UAE dirham or Saudi riyal in addition to the US dollar, and that is to address the issue of the time period and the routing through the New York and all that. So next up, unexplained expenditure and undisclosed sales. If you have any unexplained expenditure, and those of you who have gone through an audit with FBR would be aware of how much of a problem both these items can be. For unexplained expenditure, it can be introduced at the higher of the fair market value or cost, and you can legitimize that by paying just 4% of the value. For undisclosed sales, Well, there's no market value, it's just the sales figure. So you'll have to pay the 2% of actual value. And for all other assets except domestic immovable property, you can declare them for a rate of 4%. So to sum it up, for domestic immovable properties, be it land or constructed, the rate would be 1.5%. However, for land, it would be the higher of 150% of FBR value or DC values, 150%. For constructed property, at least 150% of DC value, where FBR value has not been notified. Then we have foreign liquid assets. If they are being repatriated to Pakistan, 4%. If they are not repatriated to Pakistan, then 6%. And for undisclosed sales, it's 2%. And then for everything else, be it other assets other than domestic immovable property or unexplained expenditure, it's simply 4%. Okay, so with this, we move on to timeline, another important section. And after this, I'll take your questions. So while the declaration needs to be made by 30th June 2019, the tax can be deposited later, as I just mentioned, by paying additional amount of default surcharge in addition to the tax rate that we have discussed above. And the default surcharges would be, you have 4 time period, so you can make the declaration by 30th June 2019, pay the stated rate by 30th June 2019, done and dusted, it's over. But you file the declaration on the last minute, you got really late, the system had trouble or whatnot, maybe you were just too lazy or one of the other reasons. And although you have filed the declaration, you have yet to pay the amnesty. So what to do? How to pay the amnesty tax? If you pay that from 1st July to 30th September 2019, you can do that by paying an additional 10% default surcharge on the amount of the tax that you have to pay. If you even miss that time period, you can still pay it by 31st December, but for this quarter, starting from 1st October 2019, ending on 31st December 2019, the default surcharge would now increase to 20%. If for some reason you still couldn't pay it, don't worry, you can still pay it from 1st January 2020 to 31st March 2020 by paying a default surcharge of 30%. And if you've missed that for some reason, though I would wonder why would you do that? Anyway, then you can still pay that from 1st April 2020 to 30th June 2020 by paying an additional default surcharge of 40%. Before we move on to miscellaneous provisions, if you have any questions with regard to what we have covered to this point, now is the time. You can ask them now.
Okay. So Nuruddin Binami has asked my private
Nuruddin Benami?
Binami
Benami.
or Bimani.
Okay.
She got influenced by the topic of this discussion.
I was really taken aback. I was like, does somebody has that name?
Sorry, my bad.
It happens. It's perfectly fine.
My private limited company has underpaid provisional tax due to difference in interpretation of law. So is it possible for us to use amnesty law and pay the tax which is lower than actual tax?
Yes, you can. Good news.
Is there, Waqas Ahmed has asked, is there any restriction on the sale or purchase of any asset disclosed under Benami Act, like to whom it could or couldn't be sold?
I don't think you'll be disclosing under Benami Act. I think what you wanted to say was perhaps that is there any restriction on assets to be sold that are declared under this Asset Declaration Ordinance. If that is your question, no.
Okay, Sheroz has asked if any husband bought house in the name of his wife and now want to declare the property, so should he declare an amnesty scheme or make his wife filer and declare? In case wife becomes filer, what will be the tax implications and tax rate?
You really should go to a tax advisor. But anyway, briefly, you can do both. which one would be most beneficial for you would depend on your individual circumstances. For that, I would suggest meet any good tax advisor or professional that you trust, share with them the details, and they'll advise you. If you want, I'll be sharing our firm's contact detail at the end. The initial consultation is absolutely free of cost. You can give reference of ACCA, you'll be treated like VIP in that case, and you can simply get an idea which is the best way for you going forward, and then make your own decision. Next.
Abdul Wahab has asked, if a taxpayer declares his Benami property in the scheme, will the Benamidar will be protected?
Oh, that's a really good question. I like your thought process. Well, there's nothing that would implicate him, but still, I would wait for the rules to be released. With regard to this ordinance, there is nothing that is implicating the Benamidar. The person who held the Benami seems to be totally protected, but let's just wait for the rules to be released to be more sure about that. Next.
Amir Amiruddin Bana has asked, if someone has property with legitimate income, however, forgets to declare in their return, then what will he do?
Before I answer that, can you tell me how can somebody forget to declare? I mean, it's not like something wrong.
It might happen.
Entire property. We are not talking about a few thousand rupees. Okay, if somebody forgot to declare and they have been filing, then they can do one of the two things. They can go for a revision by the book, or they can avail amnesty. Practically, go for amnesty. If you go for revision, more likely than not, FBR would open your audit. Okay, and that can lead you to a lot of troubles. So I would suggest in your scenario, it's a general suggestion without any liability, because I don't know your exact circumstances. Again, do consult a professional first. But generally, what you have asked in that scenario, generally speaking, the amnesty scheme is better. Next.
Sayyid Haris Ahmed has asked, can an individual file declaration under ASO while his case is pending with tax department?
Well, it depends on which stage is your case. Is it with Commissioner Appeal? Has it gone to tribunal or a court of law? So if you can tell me at which stage is your case, I can guide you. Next.
Rahil Feroz has asked, if overseas Pakistani who is not a registered taxpayer of Pakistan and all his savings earned from Saudi and kept it in Saudi, do I require to declare savings from the foreign account maintained in Saudi Arabia, or should I require to pay tax when I transfer my money to Pakistan?
Well, there are two things. If you'll repatriate your money to Pakistan through banking channel under Section 111 and under the Economic Reform Act 1992, it would automatically be protected. There would be no tax on it and no question asked up till a certain limit, $100,000. So if the amount is still that and you repatriate that to Pakistan through banking channel, you have nothing to worry. If the amount is more than that, and you want to bring it to Pakistan, then it might be better to declare it. Next.
He has further stated that I am not a registered taxpayer and got the land from inheritance. Will there be any benefit to my by declaring this land?
Can I ask if you hold an NTN already or not? And if you do, if you are filing your tax return, because my answer would really depend on these things. So let me know. Meanwhile, I'll answer the other questions. Next.
Can you please elaborate the term undisclosed expenditure as defined in the ordinance?
Well, it is what we discussed initially in the intro to any expenditure that you have not disclosed or underreported. For example, how can that be? Maybe there was a private company, for some reason, they forgot to mention their proper expenses and underreported. Now, it might be that they transacted with the counterparties who have reported that, and whenever there would be an audit of one of the two parties, it would come to light. So they can get their affairs in order by declaring those expenses. So if you have underreported your expenses, you have not declared your expenses, you can do that by way of this, by just paying a meager 4% on that. Next.
Talha Saeed has asked if the bank account of a taxpayer is not declared, having 20 million undisclosed credits and 18 million undisclosed or unaccounted debits in it for the tax year resulting to closing balance of undeclared 2 million, how will we declare it in this tax amnesty? Assuming out of these 18 million debits, 14 million is the purchase of an undeclared vehicle and 4 million are the unaccounted expenses, remaining 2 million is the closing undeclared balance.
ACCA does not provide paid services, contact the consultant. And I would suggest one thing, try not giving out so much specific information over these recorded sessions. It's always advisable to go in person or speak in person because these are your private information. In any case, from what you are telling, it seems like they are undisclosed income receipt in the account, they are undisclosed expenses, and then you have the cash balance. So in my opinion, these three categories would need to be declared as per the relevant amount on the relevant tax rates. For more information, feel free to contact us.
Okay. Farah Abbas has asked what will be the treatment on next year of declaration?
Very good question. It would be incorporated into next year's return.
Hassan Abbas Awan has asked what about legal ownership in case of Benami assets? Even if one declared that asset in the scheme, what about legal status after declaration?
Well, if you have declared the asset, then the first thing you should do is get it transferred in your name. I mean, why did you hold it in the name of a Benamidar in the first place? Because you were hiding the legal title. You did not want it to come to the fore. So once you are declaring it in the amnesty, you have got it legitimate. It is all whitened. Why would you still want to hold it in the name of the Benamidar? Get it transferred in your name.
Okay, last comment.
Hang on. Let me clear the concept a little bit. The legal title is a different thing. The legal title is who owns it. And then there is the beneficial owner. So with Benamidar, the legal title is held by maybe your servant, but you are actually the beneficial owner because you have tried to camouflage the transaction by holding it in someone's name who is not actually the beneficial owner. Remember, in the context of discussions of Panama, the trust, the beneficial owner, those concepts come into play here. So if you are availing the amnesty, you are legitimizing your asset. In that case, I would professionally suggest that there would not be an issue left now, and hence you should transfer the legal title in your name too, but that would not automatically happen by just declaring the amnesty. You can't think that because I've declared it in the amnesty, it would be in my name. No, it doesn't work like that. What if somebody declares your property in their name? Would it become yours? No. You actually have to then go through the legal process and transfer the title in your name as well. I hope that makes it clear.
She has further said that I do not understand the next year treatment if we declare land.
Who is she, please?
Farwa Abbas.
Okay.
If we declare land through amnesty, will we get those reduced rates on next year's too? Or after declaration, everything will be normal?
Farwa, the wealth tax in Pakistan got abolished more than a decade ago. So you don't pay tax on the property every year. The next time you'll have to pay the tax on the property would be when you'll dispose of the property. You might have a capital gain or not, depending on how long you held it for and at what price you sold it. And you would definitely need to pay advance income tax as a seller. Okay. Then you get property tax challans. Those property taxes are by the local excise and taxation department. It has nothing to do with the FBR. People often confuse that with it. So what we are talking about is the income tax, the Federal Board of Revenue. The local property tax challan that you receive from excise and taxation, it has nothing to do with this, and they are normally issued on the DC values. and some adjustment each year made accordingly with reference to the market value. I hope that makes it clear. Next.
Mohammed Hamza is asked, if a non-filer avails amnesty, how will he become a filer? Because under section 182, ATL does not get updated regularly now. Are there any chances of this clause to be removed?
That's a very good question, Hamza. Just the other day, ACCA and I, as the chair of the taxation committee, was having a discussion with our partners on the same thing. This is something that ACCA is also proposing, that for broadening of tax base, many steps need to be taken, and one of them might be this. As far as your question is concerned, again, we'll have to wait for the rules to be released by FBR. It might be that FBR allows the non-filer to file that, or if they just want the filers to avail that, but still have the wider population as a target, then they will need to create some sort of a mechanism. Maybe extend the date to become the filer by 30th June, perhaps. So they need to work out some kind of mechanism. And I do know that this is a point that is being discussed. Let's just wait till next week, by the time we'll have the rules available to us, and the situation would be clear then. And inshallah, we'll have a session, a small session on the rules too, right?
Rahil Feroz has said that, as you asked, I don't have NTN, got the land transferred into my name via inheritance. Will there be any benefit for by declaring this land?
Absolutely, it would become your legitimate wealth and you'll have the white money. So my suggestion to you, do get the NTN, come within the legal ambit.
Usman Khan has said second partner beneficiary could be affected by this.
Second partner beneficiary?
Let's clarify the question. Ahmed in the meanwhile has asked, the dependents, for example, wife, need to file tax returns having no income and owning inherited land?
If she owns the land, she needs to file. Remember, as I've clarified before, the regulatory requirement of filing the tax return has nothing to do with the fact that whether you actually have any taxable income or have to pay any tax or not. There is a term we use, BTL, below taxable limit. You still file the return for that. You might have no income, you might have below taxable income, but you need to file the tax return to discharge your legal liability.
Two more questions. Hassan Abbas has asked, while transferring legal ownership, one has to pay transfer tax and some other taxes. Are those taxes exempted after declaration? What about sales deed? Without that, one cannot transfer the asset.
Okay, good question. You are confusing two things here. The transfer of property, that is all being done at the provincial level. The amnesty is for the undeclared wealth. The undeclared wealth, expenses, sales, assets you are holding for those, you can legitimize that. Because if you don't, with the law of the Benami Act, they can be confiscated by the state. You can end up in the prison. It is how serious it is, right? Now, for transferring the asset, you would need to pay the due fees to the relevant authority. For example, you hold a property in, let's say, DHA or Bahia town, and you had that in your driver's name. So now to transfer that in your name, you will still need to pay the relevant transfer fee and the duties. They are not exempted by way of the amnesty. The amnesty has allowed you to legitimize your undeclared wealth per se. I hope it clarifies the question.
Vijay Arjun has asked, does this allow one to buy and sell property immediately after declaration, or will that person have to wait until his name appears in the ATL?
That's a good question, Vajat. Again, we'll have to wait for the rules that are being formulated to see whether they just insert a clause or a mechanism that filing the declaration you become a filer, or whether they extend the date. So because there is ambiguity at the moment on this point, so I'd suggest wait till next week. By the time we'll have the rules, and it would be more clear then.
Last question. Adnan Ahmed Ansari has asked,
Are you sure? Last question?
Yeah.
Don't be so sure.
Cash deposits in case if a salaried person falls in the scheme or not.
Say that again, sorry.
Cash deposits in KSA for salaried persons falls in the scheme or not?
Okay, for a salaried person making cash deposits in Saudi Arabia, if they want to declare that, that falls within the ambit of the scheme. If you want to keep the cash in Saudi Arabia, that would be higher rate. Foreign liquid asset not repatriated, remember the rate, 6%. If you want to repatriate that to Pakistan, it would be on the lesser rate of 4%.
We have one more question.
I told you.
Muhammad Hamza has asked, sir, you might have answered this question, but once more, can you please confirm how will one declare expenses because there are no expense declaration in previous amnesties?
Hamza, I did answer that before, but when you ask so nicely, how can I say no? Okay, so here it goes again. What you need to do is, if you have any undeclared expenses, you'll fill the amnesty form, or you can simply go to your consultant, give them all your details, they'll do that for you, and you'll simply pay a meager 4% on that, and it would be legitimized. And then when the next return would come, your affairs would be adjusted to reflect that declaration. Next.
That's it.
Okay, great. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, keep on writing them so I can address them in the next question answer break without us having to wait. So next up, miscellaneous provisions. By now, we have gone through a few bits. We have gone through the brief history of amnesties in Pakistan. We have seen what this Asset Declaration Ordinance is. We have seen what its scope is, what are the exclusions, what are the tax rates, what are the timelines, and by what date what can be declared. Now, there are a few important miscellaneous provisions. The first one is concerning confidentiality. While maintaining confidentiality of declaration under the ordinance is required, but there is a lacuna. Unlike the previous scheme, the last one, there is no penal clause in case of a breach. So the ordinance does require the officers to ensure there is confidentiality, don't reveal this and that, but there is no provision in the ordinance for the imposition of a fine or imprisonment of any person for breach of confidentiality provision. So this would be a big worry for anyone wanting to avail the amnesty. But again, it's not something that cannot be addressed in the rules. So it might be that the rules coming out by the end of this week or sometime next week by FBR might address this. But as it stands at the moment, the ordinance does not. Protection from prosecution. The contents of the amnesty declaration cannot be admitted as evidence against the declarants for the purpose of any proceedings relating to the imposition of penalty or for the purpose of prosecution under any law. So good news, under the ordinance, anybody availing the amnesty would have a blanket protection from prosecution. Anti-abuse provision. An important anti-abuse provision which was not included in the previous scheme is that the declarants won't be able to claim any allowance, credit or deduction in respect of the assets declared and incorporated in the book in consequence of such declaration. In simple terms, this would mean positive impact re tax compliance in future. So did you get what I said just now? Pay attention, this is very important. So you have made the declaration, but you won't be able to claim any allowance, credit or deduction in respect of the assets declared and incorporated in the book. So you can't say, okay, I've declared this much million of expenses and I'll take that off in my tax return now. So this was a lacuna in the previous amnesties, that a loophole was left open for people to exploit. You can't do that this time around. You are being given the benefit to legitimize your wealth for a very, very low tax rate. And that's it. You can't take a double benefit by then again using that amount against a future tax liability. And hopefully that should lead to a positive impact for tax compliance in future. So I think this is perhaps the second last session of the day, section of this session of the day. Key differences as compared to the last tax amnesty. You should really pay attention now. This is the question you ask a lot. Okay, so one of the common questions that is being asked is different this time around. There are a few key differences as compared to the last tax amnesty in 2018. Below are these key differences as compared to the last amnesty scheme. Number one, the requirement to deposit cash in any local or foreign bank account would mean that the fraudulent declaration made by exaggerations with the hopes of continuing the existing malpractices in future with having the buffer of excess declared cash to cover the future income streams which might not be declared or under declared would end. This is what I basically explained to you in some details in the beginning, but I'll just briefly re-summarize it again. What used to happen was that you can just say on paper that I hold this much cash and declare that on the amnesty. Now the rates are normally dirt cheap, 1%, 2%, 4%. Whereas on your future income, how much tax would you need to pay? Harun sir, how much tax would a person on average need to pay on their future income, business income?
I think it's not realized income, isn't it? Some future income.
Yeah, in future on their realized income. You are becoming a tax person. Okay, in future, what is the tax rate a person would need to pay on their realized income?
Sorry,
It would be around 29-30%. So what if you declare more cash today at 2%, and then you underreport that future income in the future? You end up saving 28%. And you continue to do the malpractice. And the aim of broadening and proper following of the tax laws would not be achieved. By having this requirement that you actually need to hold that cash, the aim is to try to close that lacuna. That still there is a possibility that some people might still manipulate that by borrowing cash from people, but it would be comparatively harder. I mean, how much could you borrow and from who? And then you have to hold for that time period. So it becomes more difficult to exploit this provision. And more people would be actually disclosing the cash that they hold compared to previous schemes where you did not have to have the cash in hand or provide any evidence for that. So this is one of the key difference, even for any liquid assets that are not repatriated to Pakistan and are held in foreign countries, there is still the requirement to hold that cash in the bank accounts there. So this is a good change in my opinion. Then we have the anti-abuse provision we have discussed before on the last slides here, that you can't claim any allowance, credit or deduction in respect of the tax declared and incorporated in the books under this amnesty scheme, so you can't take double benefit. This is again a good positive change. And then the inclusion of broader categories of income streams like assets, expenses and sales within the scope of the amnesty scheme. Another important change, and in my opinion it is a better one, is the more impetus on fairer market values, as evident from the requirement of using the higher of 150% of FBR value or DC value, whichever is higher, or in the case of constructed property, at least 150% of the DC value. Then comparatively higher rates of taxes in case of foreign assets not repatriated to Pakistan, that would go as high as 6%. So it's still very cheap compared to the tax rates that one has to pay, but in the context of previous amnesty schemes, the rates are comparatively higher. Introduction of the timeline for late payment with default surcharges. Well, personally, I'm of the view that tax amnesty do have a negative repercussion for those taxpayers that have been following the law. However, there are times in economic cycles when a country, due to its constraint, is forced to launch a tax amnesty, just like I shared last year while discussing last year's tax amnesty. So if you are doing that, then the aim is to get as many people in the circle as possible. And then to do that, you should facilitate that. Last year, there was a problem that firstly, the tax for foreign asset had to be paid in dollar. Secondly, there was one deadline. And if that deadline was missed, you were not allowed to pay the tax amnesty tax later on. The change this time around is that you can still pay the tax on the tax amnesty after filing the declaration, after the end of 30th June 2019, but not without the late payment surcharge. So it's a win-win situation. Anybody who missed the deadline but want to avail the amnesty would still be able to do that, but they would still need to file the declaration by 30th June. So it might be that they have filed the declaration, their funds are still in the banking channel, or they have cash flow problems or stuff like that, or any issues for the business, they can use that. However, they would need to pay the late payment surcharge on that. So this is also a newer concept in this amnesty. The lack of penal clause in case of the breach of confidentiality is also different, though on the negative side. And I hope this would be addressed in the FBR rules to be released, because if they are not, it can have a serious impact on the effectiveness and success of this amnesty. And some of the exclusions are newer. For example, the benamidar were not previously included in the amnesty schemes. So the benamidars are also included in the exclusions now. And similarly, the gold and precious stones, bearer price bonds, and bearer assets are included within the exclusions to try to curb the menace of money laundering. So these are the key differences compared to the last amnesty scheme, and this brings us to our longest, perhaps the most theoretical, subjective, and the session garnering most interest: the reservations, the impact, and the way forward. Can this amnesty be a success? What are the challenges, and how can it be a success? But before we do that, Iman is looking here. I think he wants to ask the questions. So let's do that.
Zishan Shahbaz has asked, custom rules of Saudi allow a person to take in hand 60,000 Saudi riyal per visit to home country. If a person annually makes 2 visits and took money in hand and bought property in Pakistan, does tax authority accept the money bought in hand or need to declare in amnesty?
Which is what we were discussing with the
Arun is smiling because this is exactly the thing we were discussing with a partner institution yesterday. We were collaborating on joint budget proposals. It's a very good question. The problem is there is a lack of harmonization in various laws in Pakistan. First of all, you need to understand that in addition to the Saudi custom laws, you also have to see the Pakistan's law. Pakistan allows you to bring a certain amount of money. You have to check that limit. Secondly, the problem is while that amount is allowed to come within the country, you still have to declare that in your tax return, show the evidence where you brought it, properly account for it. If you haven't done that, and you still brought the property, then you would need to avail this amnesty to legitimize that. It is a bit odd because there is a set of law which allows you to bring the money in the country, and then you can use that money to buy the property, but then that is not recognized. So I can see there is a problem in the harmonization. But on their part, they can argue that they still required you to file your tax return when you brought the property, and you should have filed all the relevant records with that. If you haven't, there was lack of compliance on your part too. So in short, to answer your question, you will need to avail the amnesty if you haven't declared that properly before by filing your tax returns. Next.
Abdurrahman has asked, sir, what would be the case if bearer bonds are shown in amnesty? I mean, they are cash-like equivalents, but can't be deposited in bank. Can someone show bearer bonds now and understate future income?
Well, I just shared with you once again just a while ago that bearer bonds are excluded from this amnesty. So you cannot declare them under this amnesty. Next.
That's it for now.
That's it.
For now.
What happened today? Maybe people are understanding it so well. Otherwise, we are normally swamped with questions. Okay, that's good. So we can go into the last section of today's session. So the question on everyone's mind, what are the challenges, what's the impact, and what's the way forward? Let's find out. Well, there is a well-supported argument that any amnesty, for that matter, generally speaking, sends out a wrong message to the masses and businesses, particularly those who have been complying, that effectively the wrongdoers end up getting the better end of a deal without any severe reprimand. This has psychological and practical ramifications and implications for compliance in the long term. However, as I previously shared, at times the economic situation is so dire and does require the use of such schemes. There were, in my opinion, other better options to achieve the stated goals of this scheme. However, there are certain things which are positive about this scheme, including the requirements to deposit the cash in the bank, the huge focus on fair market values, introduction of late payment deadlines with default surcharges, and the anti-abuse provisions. Certainly, there's always room for improvement, and even this scheme could have been made better. So the most important challenge, however, would be to address the uncertainty. Like I answered in response to one of the questions, the biggest problem for any amnesty scheme is the uncertainty. And that's not just the uncertainty about the amnesty, it's also the general uncertainty about the general economic condition and the country. So the lower the uncertainty, the more successful the amnesty scheme would be. Well, the good thing is that the Prime Minister still enjoys tremendously in terms of trust in his personal integrity and has somewhat a charisma, but the general atmosphere, the economic atmosphere of uncertainty is damaging. Unfortunately, this is mostly stemming from an unaccountable spree of speculation on media and negative reporting. I mean, somebody shared with me the clip. I won't be naming any channel, it's against the professional ethics, but somebody shared with me the screenshot of a mainstream media channel claiming that the government is shutting down the money exchanges from next week. Yeah, a mainstream news channel. Okay, I just pulled a few strings and I was told it's totally wrong. And within a few minutes, it was on social media. They issued the clarification, it's totally wrong. And the interesting thing is there was no such announcement made by anyone. What happened was there was a fake social media account of the finance minister, and whoever was running that fake account put out a tweet on that. And this mainstream media channel actually ran an entire news story of such huge ramifications without verification based on that false social media tweet. So now what happens in general is, as soon as the news hit the business circles, there was more uncertainty. Because understand what would happen. If the exchanges were to close, a lot of smuggling of the currency and money laundering would start. There would be more uncertainty about the currency. The value of rupee would plummet even more, and it would create more of a chaos. So people don't understand these economic ramifications. They think at times that it is patriotic to lie and spread a rumor, thinking it might be good, and then responsible institution who should properly be regulated and should be verifying news before running them do that, unfortunately, without verification. So this actually result in huge speculation and a huge atmosphere of uncertainty, which is very damaging. So coming back to the point, let us recall, as I shared with you, that the last amnesty scheme only really took off when the Chief Justice announced that the court was not to review it, leading to the confidence of the potential declarants. So firstly and most importantly, the uncertainty would need to be curbed for this scheme to be successful. Secondly, the relevant authorities need to run public campaigns and demonstrate that they have the information gained through OECD multilateral convention about Pakistani residents' offshore accounts. Why and where would this lead? Remember, I told you that nobody in the world likes to pay taxes on their own. It has to be a cost-benefit analysis, a stick and carrot policy. While you are giving an incentive on the financial term that you are able to pay very low taxes and legitimize your affairs, what is the penal clause? What if they don't? That is the important question. There has to be a system where people should be aware that if they do not avail this last opportunity, now the databases are being integrated. Information is being obtained from partner countries under the OECD multilateral convention, and it would be used to run a drive to ensure that anybody who does not avail the amnesty after its deadline and still have illegitimate wealth, then using that information and the laws of the land, including the Benami Act and the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2010, would be prosecuted and their properties confiscated. Do that and see the success rate of this amnesty, because the carrot alone would still entice a few, but not all. In order to have maximum success, you need to not only design it smartly, enforce properly, but also have a proper scheme to address the other end of the spectrum, the enforcement. Those who do not avail this amnesty scheme will be held accountable by the taxman. Do that and see the success. So as I was saying, the relevant authorities, FBR and the Finance Ministry would need to run public campaigns and demonstrate that they have the information gained via OECD multilateral convention about Pakistani residents' offshore accounts, and are further strengthening the mechanism to launch a compliance drive immediately following the amnesty. Announcement of such a compliance drive with details of the penalties and timelines. It has to be specific. There's no trust without being specific. It should be so much specific that even the timeline and penalties of such a enforcement drive should be announced. And it should be widely publicized in the print and electronic media as well as on social media. And along with the curbing of uncertainty, this can and will lead to the success of the scheme. Don't do that, and you won't be able to achieve the result you desire. So with that, this is the end of the session. We can take any questions that you have now. And for some reason, they forgot to put on my contact detail, my staff. So as I promised with you, not a problem. I'll just do the next best bit. I'll share with you the magic tip. Just write my name, Umar Zahir Mir, on your Google or whatever browser you use. You'll be brought to my WordPress blog. It's umarzahirmir.wordpress.com. You have all my contact details there. You can send me an email, WhatsApp. Even if you have any query that is more personal, you can't discuss it here about the amnesty, you can ask that later on too. So, any questions?
Mohammed Ahmed has asked if the amnesty particularly disallows illegally earned money to be declared under the scheme, then why is it considered to be a tool of money laundering by opposition parties?
Am I allowed to answer that? Arvind is smiling here. Okay, I'll try to answer that as non-politically as is possible. Well, politics is a game of perception. How many people actually bother to read the document? And how many of those who read it are actually able to understand? You guys are very lucky. You are highly educated. You are ACCAs. Then your body, ACCA, cares for you. It's organizing these sessions. But you are a small fraction. You'd be probably 0.001% of the total population who understand these facts and figures and these things. For general population, the majority of whom is illiterate, the rhetoric is what counts. Create a perception, make a rhetoric, do it sufficiently enough, and do it continuously to a level that people start believing it, and then you can achieve the political mileage. That's the best answer I can give. Next. So I think that was within the professional ambit without being political.
Yes.
Zakur Ahmed has asked, does this mean anyone possessing undeclared prize bonds, gold, would have to sell them and deposit the proceeds in a bank account?
See, you are getting the hang of it now. Exactly.
Abdul Rahman has asked, if a person lives outside Pakistan and sends remittance through a proper banking channel to his brother or relative to purchase any property on his behalf, but on his own name, not a Benami case, but haven't filed income tax returns, in this case still he needs to go for amnesty or filing his return will be sufficient, showing the wealth of properties as opening balance in penalty return.
Okay, so just to make sure I correctly understood your question, there is a person who is sending foreign remittance to his family here in Pakistan. They are doing it properly through banking channel, and for that they are sending foreign currency, which is encashed in Pakistan into local currency, and then that local currency is used to buy property in their name. Okay, in that case, if you go through the session we ran on the income tax return filing, that is available on ACCA's GoToWebinar channel. I have shared that there, that one of the requirement to have NTN and file the tax return is if you hold a property above a certain area in Pakistan, which is very small area. So for all practical purposes, yes, you fall within that ambit, and if you have the property in Pakistan, you should have applied for an NTN and should have been filing your tax return. If you haven't done that, you can do one of the two things. You can file the tax return for the previous year and file the return, but then you'll still have that sword hanging over your head that FBR can start your audit. Why were you not doing that when the time was due? Or if you don't want that uncertainty, we being human beings, business persons, hating uncertainty the most, then you can avail this amnesty, and that would be the end of it, no question. Next.
Okay, Mubin Imtiaz has asked, if I have purchased a property from amount given by my brother, taken on my name because he's not in Pakistan.
Okay, so it's a different scenario. Amount given by brother taken on my name because he is not in Pakistan.
Yes.
Now you need to clarify how the amount was given, whether it was given locally or it was a foreign remittance sent to you. If it was a foreign remittance, was it sent to you through proper banking channel in foreign currency in cash in Pakistan, or was it sent through some other way, hawala, or somebody brought it by hand or whatever? Please clarify that so I'll be able to guide you. Next.
Muhammad Hamza Khan has asked, just to confirm, gold and precious stones can't be declared, right?
Yes.
I think people are asking about how will they be able to claim verifiable CPD by attending this webinar. So I think that needs to be shared with them. It's very simple. We have a complete record of how many people attended, for how long were they in the session, etc., etc. We will send out certificates of participation through email to all the participants, and at the same time, we will share the handouts and the video recording of this webinar with the participants, hopefully by tomorrow. So using the certificate of participation, you can claim verifiable CPD, for this webinar. It's a simple process. Go to your My ACCA account, look for CPD returns, and in there you have the complete process available where you to tell whether this was relevant to you, how will this be relevant, how will you apply it in the workplace, and is there an evidence available? So you answer these questions, then you will automatically get credit.
Fantastic. And we have some questions coming up.
Yeah.
Sayyid Faraq Iqbal Naqvi has asked, I would like to ask a broader question regarding.
No. First, Mubin. Mubin has said it's come through banking channel 50%, and other 50% is through hawala. So the banking channel 50% is fine. You need to declare that in your income tax return. Again, if you haven't filed your income tax return already for the relevant period, then you would have that song over your head that you can open your audit still. For the other Hawala 50%, definitely the amnesty. You need to avail that. You might even want to consider availing amnesty 50% if you did not timely declare that. Again, best share your specific situation and circumstances. Shoot me an email and I'll guide you. G, next.
Palak Iqbal has asked, I would like to ask a broader question regarding Pakistan's tax culture. What steps do you think to be taken at the macro level to improve Pakistan's tax culture?
Well, Palak,
full-fledged
it's a full-fledged debate and perhaps a full day session at a minimum. Go to my Twitter. I have a poll running till a little after Iftar time today. It has given you 3 options of my next write-up. One of them is exactly the topic that you have asked me the question for. Just cast your vote for this option, and fingers crossed, if that gets the highest number of votes, my next article will be on that. It would be published on the weekend and shared on the blog site.
I think alongside that, ACC's budget proposal also gives recommendations on how the tax
Next thing, I was about to say that. ACCA has sent its budget proposals. They have been publicized as well, and detailed copy of them will be released to the members, I think, after Eid.
Yes.
We'll be releasing the detailed copies of the budget proposals after Eid. So you'll be able to see a lot of steps to broaden the tax base, to improve the confidence of taxpayer, to reduce the subjective powers that create so much of harassment, and other steps that can be taken at the macro level, including the reforms, structural reforms, which can lead to an improvement in the Pakistan's tax culture. Next year.
Khwaja Sadmi has asked, is it a good option for non-filers to utilize this amnesty scheme to become a filer, or use the normal route and start by declaring of last year's?
For yourself, it would depend on your individual circumstances. I mean, one size doesn't fit all. So again, I would suggest do consult professionals with all your specific information, and they'll be better suited to guide you. You can even send me an email. My detail will be available on my blog site, ozmeet@nlcc.pk, and I'll be more than happy to help you. Next year.
Adnan and Qasir.
Why are you missing Fazan Ali?
Fazan Ali said that thanks for such a good session. And Nadir Ibrahim said thanks for such a superb session.
I wanted to get the questions and then.
No, pass all the comments. They are important for the motivation of all of us, including the participants.
Nabil Ibrahim says, thanks for such a superb session. Adnan and Qasir asked how to become a tax expert like Marzayi Mir.
That's very kind of you. Well, Adnan, the same way you become an expert in any other field, ACC equip you with all the necessary knowledge. Choose the field you want to work in. If tax is your bit, then start working with someone who is really good. Start getting practice, focus on it, and just like doing all the other things you would in any other field, you should be able to do that. Next.
I think this next question has already been answered by Nuruddin
Bimani.
Yes. Faisal Manzoor says, brilliant session. Ghulam Farid says it was quite informative. Thanks. Waqas Ahmed says, great job. It was really informative.
You are most welcome, guys. Thanks for your kind compliments.
Mohammed Aurangzeb says, thank you. Thanking you for such an informative session. Good to listen to you.
You're most welcome. Thanks for attending.
Adil Ahmed says, thanks, really informative session. Bilal Awan says, good session, Sir Omar. You are really helping members in getting tax expertise.
You're most welcome. There is a comment for Harun too. You just missed that. Sayyid Falak Iqbal Naqvi said, for Harun, is there any budget 2020 webinar in the pipeline? Falak, isn't that like, I think he means on our pre-budget proposals.
Post-budget mostly. So
we can
be running
do
post-budget sessions. We will be running
tax sessions on how to file your tax returns, etc. So all these are in the pipeline, just as the real season for taxation begins.
Just wait until after the Eid and you'll get your desires.
Storm of taxation webinars.
Next.
India says, great job, sir. Gurez says, looking forward
Thank
to
you.
the next sessions, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Ishtiaq says, thanks, Umar Zahir Saab. It's been a great learning through your webinar as always. Irfan
Most
says,
welcome.
once again, learned a lot.
That's great. So let's close with a note of thanks. Thank you guys for taking out the time for today's session. I hope you all find it not only entertaining, but also a very good learning. And I would like to thank the entire team of ACCA, Harun Saab, Iman, and all of you guys and all the support staff for this session. Inshallah, we'll be doing a session on the rules once they are formulated. And as always, ACCA will keep on taking lead in bringing to you in a timely fashion the important topics that are important in professional development of our members and the profession and for the professionals in general as well. So with that, thank you very much. Have a nice evening and a good iftar. Take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz.